So today I'm going to talk to you about upcycling practices as a way of research through craft and repair towards alternative futures of clothing. But before I begin, I will introduce myself in a minute. For those of you who don't know me, I'm going to talk a little bit about first generation industry cycles and secondhand materials, some sort of in the space between the two of those. I'm going to look at the transition design framework and how I'm applying that as a mixed, the framework that I'm going to apply for my craft-based studies and autoethnography as a mixed method. I'll go over some of my initial findings. I'm still in the middle of all of this. And then I'll talk about what's next. Oh, you can go to the next slide. You can go to the next slide again.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so again, my name's Donna Maione. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. I think some of you are in the evening, so good evening to some of you. And I'm a teaching fellow in the transition design program. And my background is as a clothing designer in the better and mass market fashion industry. And my research interests are slowing fashion cycles toward longer, more engaged usage phases in order to benefit the environment and the wearer through reducing textile waste and creating experiences for deeper connection to the material and immaterial. So essentially, I'm moving from a product focus to an experience focus, my research. And I do this through experiments and collaboration on new ways of making and remaking clothing that will last through fads by using the excess of garments that we already own and expanding on this notion that designers to include the role of the home sewer or amateur crafter toward agency in local fashion making futures. Next slide. So in order to set a little context around pace, what I call first generation garments, so the standard industry garments that are made from either virgin or some may have recycled materials, is looking at the McKinsey model of speed to market, where it pushes designers and manufacturers to develop products at accelerated speeds. And you can see here on the right-hand side, what they call the longest cycle is a 6-month cycle that would be from sketch to product in warehouse. And these are typically reserved for basics or never out of stock items that would be replenished. And they typically use this cycle to optimize production costs to save money. The next one is the shorter cycle, which could be used for core seasonal, stay on this one. For items, so this is for color and style sensitive items. They use social media for these trends. And in the middle, you see 3 to 6 weeks. So this is the express cycle, hyper fast, where you are testing novelty items. And then they have also the read and react model for new and untested items where close monitoring is important. You might look at prints and color trends that they can tap into those that are selling, and then also cancel things that are moving slowly. And finally, the test model is for the riskiest items. And so the main point here is that design is asked to deliver at this very fast speed, and they're always looking for ways to make it even faster. You could go to the next slide. Yeah, so if you compare this to, we know that this is creating an enormous amount of waste, which I've spoken about in some other presentations. But the secondhand materials and generational garments are growing. It's a market that's continuing to rise. And what this is doing is widening the spectrum of generational garments. And this could include recycled garments made from multiple tiers of recalled materials, or disassembled garments to reconfigure new styles. So the second and subsequent generational garments may contain a mix of pre and post-consumer clothing parts to form hybrid garments. This is significantly slower than mass production, and it requires a reverse supply chain through a take-back program or as part of a product service scheme. And despite this popularization of thrift and upcycle clothing, the secondhand market cannot keep up with the pace of the used material flow. And this also, a lot of this came also from McKinsey, the same people who put out the other report that I had showed you. So if we look at the transition design framework that I'm using as a reference, as a starting point, there's 4 pillars, and I'm going to move through these fairly quickly. But transition visions for transitions is really an opportunity where design can bring to light the unseeable possibilities of a future, where you can look at ecologies of interventions, and here a deep understanding of the problem space is needed. Theories of change is a term used most often in social change initiatives, and it creates a model of socio-technical ecological systems where change transitions over long periods. And mindset and posture, which I'm going to talk about mostly today, is living in and through these transitional times. It calls on us to do self-reflection and new ways of knowing and being in the world. And this, I think, is a missing sort of piece for design, either in industry or other, in ways that we can look. There is essentially no time for self-reflection, and so how can we include this in part of our practice? And then that leads us to new ways of designing, and this refers to system interventions at any scale to solve these complex problems, as we know there's no one solution. So these 4 areas are co-evolving around knowledge and skill set, and it's a way for practitioners and researchers to configure situation-appropriate designed interventions. So it's just a model, but it's not quite a solution, but a way of working that seems to work well for my work right now. So the next slide. So I'm looking at the framework, and I'm starting with mindset and posture as a point for my material craft research. As I shift away from material focus to experience, I wanted to explore the material cues and the felt experience in making. So this node that I'm exploring as a way of self-reflection to see new ways of knowing as I myself transition from a fast-paced industry designer to slow and considered researcher. So this framework doesn't explicitly state methods of self-reflection. So you could go to the next slide. So I introduce autoethnography as my method to capture my experience of upcycled material handling sessions. So autoethnographers use their text to determine how their experiences and stories might contribute to or complement and contrast with others' experiences and stories. So the goal for assessing autoethnography, it is of course to make contributions to knowledge, but it values the personal and experiential side of things. It demonstrates the power, craft, and the responsibility of stories and storytelling. It takes a relationally responsible approach to research practice and representation. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my craft-based research. So I'm combining this as a mixed method with my writing. And I have approximately 20 experiments ranging from mask making, which I started during the pandemic, to repair of clothing, portraits of made from scraps, all from unclaimed, unwanted textiles. I also have a photo journal of textile litter that you could see down at the bottom right. But today I'm going to talk about a baby quilt. It was a gift to my nephew. It's on the top 2 images on the left. It represents care on many levels. for others in gifting, for material affordances and repair of wasted items toward future use and memory making. Next slide. So this project, Making Future Memories, took place over about 3 months with a lot of start and stops in about 5 phases. The first was the sorting scraps. The second was selecting similar fabric weight and to determine the color scores. I created an impromptu pattern based on the materials on hand. And then fourth was I pieced together the topper, and then finally hand stitched the sandwich, which is the pieces together what you call on a quilt. So I wrote after most making sessions, and 2 themes emerged, which was moving slowly and moving swiftly. In moving slowly, I uncovered some barriers, such as timing constraints. So I was thinking versus doing. I was thinking of colors. You can see here by the sewing machine, I sat on that choice of colors for a while until I decided what I wanted to do. I also had space constraints. So you could consider that as limited resources. I was using my writing space as a making space. There is also the issue with making is one side of the brain and writing is another side of the brain. So working in these 2 areas is also has posed a challenge. And then also resources and cultural constraints. So deciding the colors, I didn't have all the colors I wanted. And then also when I found out the gender of, it was I'll say a street couple, that they would prefer sort of gender normed colors for their baby. So that's sort of, I felt like a little constrained by that, that narrative. You could go to the next slide. So moving swiftly, I sort of categorized the motivations here, and the things that moved me quickly from one area to another or were motivations was that this was a gift. And so it inspired me to really make something beautiful that I thought that they would like and cherish. And also the due date was an inspiration to move faster because the baby was due at a particular time. And then also once the vision was in sight, the topper, once it was pieced together, I moved much faster. And also on the right-hand side, you see this little, I call it an accidental design. I accidentally snipped the material, so I had to do another embroidery on top of that, which kind of added a nice little touch that I wouldn't have done otherwise. Next slide. So here are a few excerpts from my entries. The 2 sections, moving slowly and moving swiftly, revealed these 2 modes of thinking and doing. So this quote, I like to make things that can stick around for a long time. So I chose a quilt as a way to make something. Usually people, I was hoping this becomes the baby's favorite blankie and it can stick around. I had also written about memories of blankets that people had made for my children, which so I looked at that as a way to make something that will last longer than the material before. And then another entry showing the temporal nature of making, sometimes slow and sometimes fast, once the vision is in sight. And so in this quote, that the most time-consuming part of the selection was the selection of colors, the preparation of the swatches, and the arrangement of the patterns, which only emerged over time. And this final quote shows that I'm still grappling with industry standards of making, which can be useful if I were to present slow local upcycling models to industry professionals. So during this preparation process, I often will not multitask and want to ruminate in my thoughts, sometimes slowing down the process and at times producing which produces a little guilt on my lack of efficiency. So I'm not done coding all of my writing. I'm in the process of that, but I wanted to share some of these emerging themes. Next slide. I'm not going to go into this next one, but I wanted to, it just sort of demonstrates my, so I'm in the process of doing a photo journal on textile litter and my reaction to this experience. So this quote brings to mind the larger context of repair, that it is about space and function, the extension or safeguarding of capabilities in danger of decay. And I have quite a bit of images, but I'm in the process of working on those as well. Next. So as I mentioned, I'm in the process of finishing my first draft of my dissertation. So I'm in the process of tying together these projects, and I'm looking at speed and place in local and global context as concentric circles that reverberate, using the concept of cosmopolitan localism. So that's what's next, is I'm also building this model based on that concept that informs transition design visions. So cosmopolitan localism is a term coined by German activist, author, and educator Wolfgang Sachs. And he describes a place-based lifestyle in which solutions to global problems are designed for local circumstances and tailored to specific social and ecological contexts, while being globally networked in the exchange of information, technology, and resources. This is also heavily reliant on the work of Manzini's work as well. Next. That is it. Thank you.